We have one more talk by our keynote speaker, John Viera, who is right now an executive in residence at the Herb Institute in Michigan. And John has a long and distinguished career at the Ford Motor Company, where he retired as the head of sustainability. And he's seen a lot of action in his lifetime, probably from around the time that Andy and I started our careers. I was looking through John's long and distinguished bio, and then I saw that he got his undergraduate degree also from the University of Michigan, and as well his MBA is from the University of Michigan. You got your MBA in 1992,
correct,
if I remember correctly, and that was the first year that I taught MBAs. So I don't know if I'm revealing too much.
You're revealing too much.
But you are certainly you certainly look very young and very, very fit. We are glad you're here today, and you can describe parts of your career in more detail as it relates to the stories that you're going to tell us. But let's have a warm welcome for John Viera.
Thank you, CB. Appreciate it. No, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for that great introduction, CB. It's always dangerous when you're the last speaker and you're standing between yourself or the team, the group, and the happy hour, right? So I'm going to keep it short. It's great to be up here. When Leslie and CB contacted me, I think, Andy, you had suggested maybe I could be a candidate. I looked at the program and I thought, boy, there's some really good stuff that, Pitt really wants to embark on here with the center. And then about a week and a half before today, I received CB's book. Now, I have a lot of books that I need to read, right? Wayne Balto and I were talking about all the books we need to read, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to start reading some of this book. And I got to tell you, right, this is a fantastic read. When I think about the Ford sustainability journey over 10 years, and I'll go through that, I was reading through the book, and really all the elements that we experienced in terms of good experiences were highlighted as one of the steps in the book. The problem that we had at Ford was it took me a lot of iterations to get to each of the steps. And I think that's something that the center here can really provide, I think, as a benefit to companies, right? I mean, here is a blueprint that's actually going to allow companies to understand what are the proper steps they need to take to go on that journey. So I know we're time bound, and CB did mention that he's going to sign my book. So CB, I'm putting the book right here, and at a 10-minute, no, don't get up, 10-minute warning, when you get up and sign that book, I know I have 10 more minutes and I got to wrap it up, okay?
So that's your speaking time, or?
No, that 10 minutes left. So you've given me so much. When you say, John, I only want you to talk 10 more minutes, you sign that book. Okay, you got it? Okay. So don't come up in like 5 minutes, right? But, when 10 more minutes, right? Okay, all right, very good. Very good. So, what I'm really excited about here is, tons of positive energy. I'll tell you what, just the opening panel was fantastic, right? I mean, from the dean to the provost, boy, your mayor is unreal, right? This guy is speaking to no notes. I mean, that was impressive. But, the great thing was it was really inspiring. Right, and then the corporate folks that came up after that. I'll tell you what, I've been to a lot of these events, and many times the panel members from corporations are pretty dull, right, Wayne? I mean, we've seen it, right? Didn't happen here. These guys, they were all real. I thought it was fantastic. So what I'm going to do is there's so many good positive things that came out of today. I'm going to modify my presentation to really try to incorporate some of the things that I heard. And, first of all, I want to start by saying, all this fantastic energy. And I know there are a couple comments around, boy, as we look, I think you had mentioned the fact that there are some bad players out there and they're kind of bringing down the energy. And what do we tell our students, because some of them are seeing, boy, this is going to be hard and there's bad players. As Andy mentioned, right, clearly there's bad players out there, but there's enough positive energy and enough positive companies that are doing the right thing. Just focus on those and elevate, talk about them, right? Elevate them, because, you know, I think go on the positive side, not the negative side, and I'll tell you where there's some hope. So, you know, part of my job at Ford was, in addition to sustainability, I had a global team that was responsible for doing all of the environmental negotiations with governments throughout the world. So at Ford, that meant fuel economy. So I had to do fuel economy negotiations with the Obama administration, and then I had to do them with the Trump administration. And so for those of you who might not know, slightly different approaches, right? Kind of different positions. But the bottom line was, you know, after Trump was elected, I remember many in the corporate world said, there goes sustainability, right? We're out of Paris, it's all downhill, right? All the bad players are gonna come up to the top, the good players are gonna go in the toilet, and it's gonna be all over. And actually the opposite happened. I actually saw a growth of the number of companies that said, this is the right thing to do. As a matter of fact, I think it emboldened more companies to move forward in this space. So yes, it's discouraging to see some, but really think about the ones that are doing fantastic work, promote them and say, these are the ones, this is what you should be doing, and I think you're gonna get a lot more positive energy, not only from companies, but of students. So, you know, I think that's all a good thing. You know, the one element, CB, that I do wanna mention from a center standpoint is I love the fact that you really emphasize, even in your initial slide, the how, right? This center, when you're talking about working with companies, I can't tell you the number of various consultants that have come into Ford, various, I'm going to call it, you know, group settings that we had where, you know, these entities would tell us, we're going to tell you what the problem is, and what we need for you to do is we need to have your C-suite commit to significant actions. And they'd all cheer, yeah, that's right, that's what we want companies to do. I mean, that doesn't help. I mean, what is the how? How are we going to do it? So I think the center, you know, set yourself apart. Maybe they need to figure out the what and the why, but really focus on the how. And Marcus, you mentioned something, right? You said that, you know, it's you know, the deliverables, the value, you know, what is it that you're actually going to deliver, right? That's what's going to be so important. The companies need to deliver that. I think the center could help the companies understand what it is that they need to deliver, because at the end of the day, that's what the value is going to be. And Andrew mentioned the fact that from a Heinz standpoint, if the center, you know, could provide that value to companies, companies are going to naturally want to come because they're going to say, they taught me the how to do this stuff. So continue to focus on the how. I think that that's fantastic. All right, so I'm going to give some Ford examples. I talked to both CB and Leslie. They said, you know, war stories, we love war stories. So, okay, so I'm going to give some war stories, and I'm going to take you through kind of a journey of Ford. So I was in the position as a head of sustainability for about 11 years, started in 2007. And I would say that, you know, when I started in 2007, in the mid-2000s, Ford was kind of I'm going to call it probably a middle-of-the-road company when it came to sustainability, both economic, we were doing better on the social side, but on the economic, kind of the middle-of-the-road company. And what that meant was we were doing less bad, right? And a lot of companies in that middle pack were doing less bad. You know, we're on the integration side, you know, not more good, but less bad. And at the time, Ford was being targeted quite a bit from a lot of the environmentalists. I mean, there was a lot of campaigns. It was really nasty because we were all about large vehicles and SUVs. And I had actually, before I went into the sustainability job, my first 24 years, I was in operations. I was in product development, and I was in manufacturing. And the reason they called me over into the sustainability role was that they said, we want to integrate sustainability into the operations. They said, before you took this position, John, or as you're taking this position, the current person is from public affairs. That position has been held by public affairs folks, and their whole role was to just figure out what Ford was kind of doing in the environmental space and report it out. And Bill Ford was CEO at the time, and as you know, Bill Ford's an environmentalist. Does everybody know that? As a matter of fact, the story with Bill Ford, when he was this young, you know, up-and-coming middle manager, his name's on the building, so he had a pretty good track, right, to get to the top. I'm just saying, don't tell him that, but I think he had a pretty good track. You know, he was actually pulled aside because he was so passionate about the environment. He was called into a meeting of very senior-level folks and board members, and they said, Bill, you know, you're kind of hanging around with the wrong people, So from now on, we don't want you to be talking to any environmentalist or known environmentalist, right? Because it's kind of messing up our reputation. And Bill was like, my name's on, thank you. He walked out, his name's on the bill. He didn't have anything to worry about. So he really wanted to move forward, right, with this sustainability, really focused on sustainability. But again, mid-2000s, we weren't really doing much. So, they asked me to be sustainability lead. I wasn't really sure. I'm thinking, God, I'm a product development guy. I know a little bit about sustainability. And get this one, right? Andy Hoffman's going to fall off his chair, but he might already know this. So the position I had before I became sustainability lead at Ford, I was a chief engineer for Expedition Navigator. How about that for confidence? That, boy, you're bringing in the guy, the biggest, most gas-guzzling vehicle, and he's going to be head of sustainability. And oh, by the way, what would Jesus drive? When that question was asked of me, I said, well, Jesus needed 2 vehicles. He's going to be driving the Escape Hybrid, but then the rest of the disciples are going to be in my 8-passenger Expedition, right? Because you got to take them all. So that's what he would be driving together, okay? But in any case, so they brought me over. They said, hey, you know the operations. We want you to take on this role in sustainability. And Bill was saying this. We want you to take on this role. I said, great. Had a conversation with him. And so he said, one of the biggest issues that we have is that, he said, we were targeted by a lot of these environmentalists. In 2005, the NGO community came out very strongly and was targeting Ford and said, Bill, you say you're an environmentalist, you say climate change is real. We want Ford Motor Company to come out with a report that says climate change is real and man has an impact, right? And man is helping to cause it. And we actually did. So the company came out with this small, 3-page press release that stated this. The NGO community was, yeah, they're cheering. They said, okay, now we need to have the plan. So when I met Bill in 2007, he said, John, your responsibility is to get the plan to deliver, our impact, reduce, make sure that we are taking our share to reduce the effects of climate change. I'm like, holy cow, how do I start with that? So I'm walking out of his office, and the first office I walk down to, chief financial officer, and he says, Viera, come in here for a second. I'm like, okay. So, I go into his office because I'm thinking, am I going to get the support of the rest of the senior team? And he says, hey, so you just got done talking to Bill? Yep, congratulations, you're the head of sustainability. He goes, how do you define sustainability? Was it? I said, well, it's this, people, planet, and profit. It's, triple bottom line and everything. He's like, exactly. And he says, and you remember that. He goes, because I want to tell you this. You're going to be coming up with some plans and some strategies. He said, we have a philanthropic arm at Ford Motor Company. It's called the Ford Fund. You are not the philanthropic arm of Ford. So if you don't come in with actions that also don't hurt our bottom line, don't come in with those actions. So it was pretty clear. And I'm thinking maybe I'm not going to get great support, but I think the good news is that it is the combination of all three, right? You have to have that economic, makes it tougher, but you have to have that economic piece. So moving on, I'm going out of his office and I'm saying, okay, so we got to come up with, how is Ford going to impact climate change? So, I brought in the stakeholders, right? So we had NGOs come in and they kept telling me how, bad we were and everything, and brought in government folks. And I said, well, how do we address this? And they said, the bottom line is you got to figure out how to significantly reduce the carbon dioxide coming from your tailpipe, right? Because the bottom line is fuel economy and carbon dioxide emissions are directly related. So as you improve your fuel economy, you reduce your carbon dioxide. So they said, you need to have a strategy that significantly reduces the carbon dioxide to the point that you could say, Ford, you're doing your share to mitigate CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. A month later, the IPCC came out with their 4th assessment report, 2007, and they said, hey, we have to hold temperatures, to 2 degrees, 450 parts per million was what they stated at the time. So we had to figure out, CB, what's our contour, right? I mean, what's our purpose? What do we need to do? And so what we did at that point, we actually had some climate scientists at Ford. We went to the climate scientists and they said, we could determine what our purpose and what our contribution to climate mitigation could be. And I said, well, how do you do that? So they said, so think about it this way. So we need to stabilize the atmosphere at 450 parts per million, right? That's the highest we can get. We were probably at 375 at the time, or at 380 at the time. They said, as you think about all the contributors to CO2 emissions, you have agriculture, you have buildings, transportation was 33% of the emissions. Light-duty cars and trucks, which Ford sells, is 20%, and then we had 15% of the industry. So he said, we could tell you theoretically exactly how much CO2 emissions we need to reduce by each and every year for the next 50 years to be on that glide path. Boom, we're able to concretize, right? Am I using all the right words? Right now we have our target. Look at this, I'm passing CB's class. So, we're able to concretize that value. We said, so that's the goal, right? So that's really good news. We were able to concretize that. So now here's the challenge. Now we got to go to our corporate strategy folks to say, we now need a specific strategy to get there. And oh, by the way, that glide path that I talked about was more stringent than the fuel economy standard. So how popular do you think I was? You know something? We're going to go even more stringent than the standard, which at the time we were always fighting the standard. But, I had Bill's backing, so I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be pretty easy. Well, the first thing I tried to do is to say, hey, I'm just going to convince everybody they got to believe that climate change is real. They'll all get on board. Their hearts will be there. You talked about the hearts, right? And I got about 50% of the people that said yes, and 50% of the people said, bad idea, go away. So now I had this dilemma. So how do I figure out, how do I get the other half to come on board? How do I get to the heads of the other half? Because I can't get to the heart. And so the way I got to the heads was this, right? The other strategy that I used. So something that the strategy folks absolutely hated was because our strategy was always based upon the fuel economy regulations and the government was changing them all the time, they're always tearing up the strategy. It was really disruptive. What I told them was, if we stuck to our glide path, the regulations will probably never be more stringent. You won't have to tear up your strategy. And because I was able to speak that language, and it was in their heads, they're like, that's a great thing. I don't have to keep redoing that. We were able to get them to say, yeah, we're going to go after that strategy. So we were able to deliver both the hearts and the heads in terms of that CO2 reduction. And yeah, it was successful. So we were able to move forward with that, and that was fantastic. So we have to go, we entice them, right? That, hey, this is what you need to do. We entice the hearts. We enticed the heads, and that was great. So fantastic. Now, things always come with a challenge. And something, CB, that I'd like to suggest to the center, I talked about focusing on the how. I think that's really important to companies. But I think the other thing that you should think about is, sustainability is hard, right? It's really hard. And I know the professor here is talking about her young students, and some of them are concerned about getting in this field. And there's a question asked, boy, this stuff is really hard. And how do we convince people within the company, the right thing to do? Well, there are going to be challenges. And I think when you're working with companies, if you could brainstorm a little bit of what are the major roadblocks that company might encounter, and how do they get through the roadblocks is really important. So here, I talked about how we had this buy-in for our CO2 reduction strategy. Well, several months later, the Bush administration came out and said, you know something? That fuel economy target, we're going to lower it even further. I'm like, holy crap, right? So then all of a sudden there's this meeting, strategy, finance, and our head of product development at the time, who I adore, who stuck by his guns, Derek Kuzak. There was a big meeting, and I remember the meeting because I thought, okay, we'll see if this all falls apart. Finance came in and they said, we could save you hundreds of millions of dollars if we just back off to the regulation that's being proposed. And then the room went silent because this guy was going to decide if, in fact, from a product development standpoint, which direction. And he said, we're sticking to, we made a commitment. We made a commitment publicly. It's our integrity. Our CEO believes in it. We're sticking to it. And not only are we sticking to it, those hundreds of millions of dollars that we're going to lose, I'm putting the onus on you guys to figure out how to make that go away. Walked out of the meeting. So having that leadership was really, really important. But my point, CB, is that you're going to get to those challenges, right? You're really going to. So the other challenge that I want to talk about, before I move on, how am I doing on time? More than 10 minutes? Okay, 13 minutes? Okay. So the other challenge that I want to talk about is kind of in the market transformation. So the other thing that we needed to do, so as we're going out in time, we need to have our vehicles more and more fuel efficient or less CO2. You know, Ford just doesn't produce small vehicles. As a matter of fact, we make a lot of trucks, a lot of big vehicles, right? So we knew in our plan that we needed to, now this was like sacrilegious, right, for the big three. I stated that we needed to move our customers from relying on V8 engines to V6 engines, right? So we went to the marketing team and they laughed at us. They're like, there is no, I said, in order to meet our numbers, we got to figure this out. Now the good news is that our technology team figured out how we can get the same performance with a smaller V6 engine versus a V8. It was something called EcoBoost. It was, I'm not going to get into the details, but we were able to do it. And it was, we can measure it, we could show it, no problem. So we said, hey, you know, it's proof that we could give the same power. And I remember having a meeting with the marketing team before we went to the chief marketing officer, and the marketing team said, no way. Market transformation, customers are never going to buy it. I don't care all day long if you show them the numbers. They're not going to buy it. As a matter of fact, right, Andy, I'll pick on you. If Andy's the GM dealer down the road, so this is what's going to happen. Someone's going to come to the Ford dealership, you know, our big F-150. We're going to say, you know something, we got this V6 engine. Gets the same performance as the Chevy V8. And you know something, you get better fuel economy, and it's going to be cheaper. No reason why you shouldn't buy our vehicle. And the person says, okay, yeah, that's, you know, I might consider buying it. I'm going to go to the GM dealer across the street just to check things out. GM dealer's going to say, did the Ford try to sell you on this magic dust that they think a smaller engine? So the marketing folks says, it's dead. It's never going to happen. We're never going to convince the marketplace that they could actually go with a smaller vehicle or smaller engine. Chief marketing officer came in, right? Give him a lot of credit. He said, you know something? If that's what we need to deliver in order to deliver our commitment to CO2 reduction, we got to figure it out. And it was a significant marketing effort, but we got to a point where nobody really talks about V6 and V8s anymore. They'll talk about power, they'll talk about towing, but they don't talk about displacement. So again, that market, but it took that chief marketing officer to say, we're sticking by the guns. But again, that was a hurdle that we hadn't even thought about. So if you could actually help the companies think through the hurdle, I think that's going to be a tremendous asset or a tremendous piece of input that you could provide to the companies that decide to join you. And then I guess the other thing I'll just kind of leave with regard to market transformation, and Andy talked about this, and Karen actually talked about, you know, transforming the markets from a recycling standpoint. And can I do a quick side story? Because like I said, I'm going off script. So Karen, you're going to love this. I don't even have to stand behind it. Can you guys hear me? You can hear me without a mic. So here's a story. Here's a story on recycled jeans. So as we talked about driving sustainability throughout the organization, we have a goal for our materials that we're going to take no virgin material out of the earth, because right, we're consuming, you know, 3 times the amount of raw materials we have in the earth. So our goal was, as we make a vehicle, we got to get to a point where we're taking no virgin material out of the earth. So we're either recycling materials, we're using renewable materials, plant-based materials that grow, or we're using recycled content. So, you know, the materials team is, you know, they're looking at all this recycled content. So some of the recycled content that we had in your vehicles, in any vehicles, the carpets that you have on the floor, unless you have a very, very cheap vehicle, and this is a very highly esteemed audience, so I'm sure you have expensive vehicles, but the vehicles, the carpeting, underneath the carpeting is padding, like you have padding under this carpeting. While the materials team came up with the strategy that they used recycled blue jeans as the padding in the carpets, right? So our public affairs team comes to me, so anything that was sustainability related, if it was a press release, they had to come to me first for affidavits that say it was true. So they come to me and they're like, hey, you know, we want to send out these press releases on recycled blue jeans and carpets. I'm like, you know, I don't think nobody's going to give a rip about that. Forget about it. They're like, no, what do we have to lose? I'm like, fine, it's real. What do we have to lose, right? So here's my lesson learned. So they go ahead, they send out the press release. So I'm thinking, this is going nowhere. I'm at home in Detroit watching Channel 7 News, and there was a story. They said, we got to tell you the story about Ford and blue jeans. I'm like, are you kidding me? So they go to a commercial, they come back, so the newscasters are this really big guy, I mean a really big guy, and a very small newscaster, right? So big, small. So they start telling the story, and they're like, hey, Ford's reporting that the equivalent of 3 pair of blue jeans are used in the underside of carpets, recycled blue jeans. So then the newscasters are like, are they my blue jeans? Because that's a lot. Or are they your blue jeans? But the bottom line, that got more press than you can imagine. And actually, sales of the Focus, we actually had a blip in sales. And of course, public affairs. I'll tell them I believe them. They actually said it was because there's awareness. It doesn't matter if your product is talked about positively or negatively sometimes in the auto industry, just getting it. But it was due to the recycled blue jeans. So I thought you'd appreciate that. So recycling is good. Oh, he's signing the book. Okay, so that's good because I have 10 more minutes and then I'm going to be done. So where I want to move to next is entrenching sustainability. You understand? You heard that term, right? How about that? I might get an extra 2 minutes with that term from CB. Or also enterprise integration. So we had the big, CO2 reduction, and oh, by the way, 97% of our footprint is from the CO2 emissions coming from our tailpipe. And the reason that number is so high, because we need to take into account the customer's use of the vehicle, throughout its life, which is 15 years. So reducing the CO2 from vehicles for an automaker is everything with regard to impacts on climate. But, we want to integrate sustainability in all the other disciplines as well. And we had a good head start. Manufacturing, we actually did a pretty good job in. Actually, when I took over and the NGOs were all talking about, we're targeting you because you're not doing enough. I'm like, no, wait a minute. I was new, so I'm like, I talked to the manufacturing guys, and we're like planting sunflowers outside. They're like, oh my God, this expedition guy isn't getting it. But outside of that, the manufacturing team actually was doing a really good job with regard to all of our plants now are zero waste to landfill. Water, we've reduced something like 12 billion gallons. In a 10-year period. So, lots of fantastic work that was being done. So, good news from an integration standpoint, manufacturing is getting it. I'll tell you, and CB, as you work with companies, don't get comfortable. I thought manufacturing was the poster child. I was in one meeting, and so they're showing all the metrics. You have to have KPIs. They're showing metrics, water reduction, CO2 reduction, emission reduction. I'm like, man, this is fantastic. We're doing great. And then they're like blowing through the VOC emissions, or volatile organic compound emissions, right? And I'm looking at these graphs, and they all look the same, and then there's this one graph that's like this. And they're like, okay, so we're set. And I'm like, no. I said, what's going on in Asia Pacific? I said, the VOCs are through the roof. They're like, yeah. They said, well, the regulations there. I'm like, guys, right? We're supposed to be not regulatory driven, so you have to keep your guard up. Just when you think you have it, sometimes that happens. But in any case, so we're driving sustainability into product development, supply chain. Where we needed the most help, though, were in like HR, finance, IT, sales, and marketing. And actually what we did to really define and drive sustainability integration in those organizations, we took the SDGs, right? When we took the SDGs that applied to Ford, and I told my sustainability team, I said, our role is to translate those SDGs to those organizations. Just don't go to those organizations and say, you need to be sustainable, here's a book, go figure it out. I said, the onus is on us to take the SDGs, map them to those organizations, and then define what it is those organizations need to be doing to actually address those SDGs. And one of the keys is, and Mark, did you mention this? I keep calling you out because you're sitting there looking at me, but you need to speak their language. So when we went to HR, or we went to finance, you got to speak their language. You can't, I think, having a consistent sustainability message is important, but man, you have to speak their language, or else they're going to think it's this, off in the far, right field, can't figure it out. Speak their language, help translate what it means to them. That's so important. Go top down and bottom up. We had Bill Ford. People were like, yeah, Bill Ford support, what else do you have to do? I said, well, something? There's like middle management, right? Kind of that layer of clay. I said, when we needed to push the objectives, yeah, we had top down, but the other thing that we did is we didn't take it for granted. As a matter of fact, we told the top of those organizations, we said, We know Bill wants to do that. Can we work with your people to come up with objectives that they help develop with us? You know, what is the leader of an organization going to say? Gosh, the head guy whose name is on the building is saying doing it. These guys are coming in and saying we're going to work with your team. So we actually did a top-down and bottom-up approach, and it was actually that middle management layer that was really key in terms of delivering those objectives. And we actually mentioned this in some of the table report outs. We actually look for small wins, right? CB, look at small actions, big difference. A lot of times those small actions, and we celebrated those amongst those organizations, that gave the organizations confidence that, hey, we could do that, or we've already, as somebody mentioned over here, didn't you mention it, I believe, that, hey, in many cases, the organization has already been doing it. Let's just tell people what they've already been doing. It gave them confidence. So that's really important to highlight that. And so I just think, CB, when you think about, it's great that you had Karen here from a marketing standpoint. Andy had mentioned this. You know, for the center, there's many business schools that are embarking on sustainability type programs with their business school. I think the one thing that I see really missing, and I agree with Andy from an herb standpoint, man, if you could actually bring in, right, the various different disciplines, if it's marketing, finance, that are going to be part of this initiative as you interface with the companies, bring in the engineering school, the more you could bring in multidisciplinary elements of the school to support your interface with the companies, the multidisciplinary elements of the school reflect the organizations in the company, but have those experts come in, do some training yourself to those organizations, so when companies come in, man, you have all those disciplines giving input to the various companies. I think that would be really powerful, so something to think about. All right, so I'm going through my conclusions right now. I guess the other elements, that I would mention is think about what can the center be known for from a partnership standpoint. If you want to be a convener, what can you be a convener of that people would say, gosh, the Center for Sustainable Business at Pitt, they do this really well. A couple of examples I would give is UC Davis out in California is fantastic at convening companies and regulators, right? So they're like the go-to source, right? So they have a lot of members that are part of their entity because they're a go-to source. We use George Washington in DC for a lot of our social-related sustainability. So think about what is the go-to source that the center is going to be? I think that's really important. And then in terms of research and practice and applied research, fantastic school. You got great faculty, great students. That's truly an opportunity to say what kind of specific research, and I know that this is your vision, what kind of specific research can the center provide to companies where they have, so I'll give you an example. Us being close to Michigan, we had a significant research project to determine, you guys have heard of autonomous vehicles, right? Everybody knows what autonomous vehicles are, the ones that drive by themselves. So we had a project that determined that we're really trying to figure out what is the net CO2 benefit and the net congestion benefit with autonomous vehicles, right? And you would think that, well, it's fantastic, but not necessarily. So my esteemed colleague, Wayne Balta here, right? Very wealthy man, and he probably owns a lot of Ford vehicles. So because of that, he might be the first guy that decides he wants to have an autonomous vehicle. Well, if Wayne owns an autonomous vehicle, and that autonomous vehicle is parked at home, drives him into work, drives back to his house by itself, comes back to get him, and then goes back. That's not going to help out congestion, right? So my point is, that was a big issue that we were trying to wrestle through. Really think about it. As you work with companies, you have this extension of their own research organization that can be used to solve a lot of the sustainability problems. So take advantage of that. Training the future leaders, love the concept of generalist, right? The bottom line is when we talk about the SDGs and using them to drive sustainability into the various organizations, it would not have been effective 10 years ago. It was much more effective over the last couple of years, and you know the reason why? Because we had more interested people on the sustainability front that were procurement people in our purchasing organization, right? That we're in our HR organization and recognize that from a retention and attraction standpoint, sustainability was a great message and we need to send everyone. When you have those generalists that have specialized in accounting, whatever it is, and they know sustainability, you're putting out into the workforce some generalists that can actually help with that integration. So I am all over that. That's a great part of what your program is, so continue to drive that. And let's see. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to kind of leave it with that. I mean, those are my suggestions, but I'll just have to say for the center here, you know, what CB and his reputation, his experience, the passion that I see here, it's great to see the city of Pittsburgh here, right? When you get the local government here, when you get local companies that are here that are saying, hey, you know, this might be useful for us, people's times are valuable, right? You didn't have to come, the mayor didn't have to come today. My guess is that he didn't have an open slate to this morning and say, thank God, man, that Pitt called me because I don't know what I'd be doing today, right? People are busy. You wouldn't have had folks here if they didn't think that there was a lot of potential. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential. There's a lot of positive energy, and I think because of that, you guys are going to do fantastic. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, or we could just do the happy hour, and I can take questions, you know, over a drink. What do you want me to do?
Why not take some sober and then take?
Okay, I like that. My answers not sober are much better, I have to say. Thank you, everybody. Okay, any questions? So I'm not formally working for Ford anymore, so if you really want some dirt, like, you know, flying cars and stuff, I could give that all to you and I won't get in trouble. Yes?
No, wait for the microphone.
Oh, she's so excited she doesn't even want to wait for the mic. Okay.
Okay. John, I loved your stories from implementation.
Oh, yes.
Yep. And so just wondering, could you share with us, when you look back on your 10 years in that role, what are some of the really big wins that you were kind of milestones that represent the legacy you had?
I would say, so clearly developing that CO2 strategy was really, I think that was a huge win because my predecessors were trying to really state the importance of climate change and we need to do our part. And they're just kind of throwing that over the wall to the strategy folks to develop something. And the strategy folks were just like, again, half of them didn't believe it, didn't want to work on it. The other half couldn't even get their heads around how to work on it. So when we got to the point of convincing that group, I think that was a big win because I didn't have to convince the heart and souls, but we were able to come up with something that was very specific. Somebody mentioned the SMART objectives. It was smart, it was very specific. And I was able to convince the non-believers in climate to take on an action because for them, it meant it was going to solve some other problem, but at the end of the day, I didn't care because it was solving the climate problem. So that was by far, I would say, the biggest victory. We've had some victories on the social side that I would have loved to talk about in terms of making a difference in the communities that we're in, because I think the social side may be even more important in a way because you're talking about the human condition and what could be done in sustainability. But I have several examples there that I could actually talk better about when I'm not sober, not truthful. But but we could talk about that maybe during the drinks. Okay? Awesome. Yes.
Yes. Since you offered to tell us what's going on behind the scenes, I'm really interested in knowing about Ford's attitude towards fuel efficiency standards, right? So the story, at least for the public, is that Obama administration made a deal with the big three that you guys need to do more EV, improve your fuel efficiency standard, and therefore we'll give you a bailout. But then after that, when Trump administration came in, there was a discussion to slow down the speed of the fuel efficiency standard. And then we get to the point where now we have a fight between the administration and California on fuel efficiency standards, and the automakers are saying, let's not go all the way and roll everything back, right? But it was a strategic mistake to say, let's roll it back. Now it's rolled back a lot, right? So give us the insight.
I'll give you the insight because I was directly involved in those decisions. How about that? Now, after I give you the insight, I might not be invited for drinks and everything afterwards, right? But no, I'm kidding about that. So here's the scoop. So with the Obama administration, actually Ford was, I'd like to brag a little bit about, Ford was the lead company in terms of setting up the fuel economy standards for the future, right? And the way it worked was between 2012 and 2022, there were, improvements in fuel economy that were firm. No dialogue, they were firm. We said from 2022 to 2025, it's so far out, we don't know where technology is going to be. If it's really advanced, maybe the proposed standards from 22 to 25 aren't stringent enough, we need to make them more stringent, or if EVs don't take off, we need to make them less stringent. But let's both sides agree, government and the auto industry, and it was actually all the auto industry, so not just the big three, but it was Toyota, it was Nissan, it was everybody. We said in 2017, 2017, we're going to all reconvene and say, are the targets for 2022 to 2025 right? So everybody agreed with that, we're good to go. So we're talking to the EPA at the time, and we're saying, hey, we got to get ready for 2017. EVs aren't taking off. We might need to relax those standards a little bit. Actually, the EPA at the time was like, you're probably right, but let's continue to talk. And then what happened? Trump got elected, and the EPA said, oh, crap, right? We're going to say the standards that we said we're going to talk about if they're good or not, we're going to say they're good, and we're done. So now we have a PR nightmare for the automakers, right? Because we knew that they were too stringent. When we look back in 2010, they were too stringent to say that we could do them. So we're looking for a discussion around what those standards should be. And what happened was it was spun into automakers are backing off from the original commitment. So it was messy. I think, just speaking openly, from a PR standpoint, we did not handle it well, right? We could not tell the story why we were taking the position that we were taking. So because of that, the perception was we were backing off on our original commitments, put us in a horrible position. And I'm not making excuses for that, because we just handled the explanation of that terribly. Now, with that being said, the good news, and I can speak for it from a Ford standpoint, the the state of California and the Trump administration, right, they're not going to parties together, right? I mean, they don't necessarily like each other. So the state of California, we had always been talking to them as well. And they were proposing some improvements to fuel economy. The Trump administration was like, no, don't talk to them. We're going to do you guys a favor, and we're not going to increase them at all. You should be thrilled about that. And we're like, because we have this commitment, we're like, we're not thrilled about that. So we actually, it was ourselves, Honda, Volkswagen, I think it was BMW, the four of us struck a deal with California and said, we are going to agree to the California proposed standards. And it totally ticked off the administration, totally ticked off, because they're like, you betrayed us, we're trying to have you guys save a bunch of money. So the rest of the automakers haven't joined on yet because they're concerned about the impact, other discussions they're going to have with the Trump administration. But Ford and Honda and BMW and Volkswagen, I give us credit that we agreed with California on the standards that they thought were appropriate. So that's kind of the whole story. Okay? So not a great story, but that is the story. We could have done a much better job explaining. So great question.
There will be a lawsuit between Trump administration and California.
Yeah, the Trump.
File the support for California?
Probably. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if we need to. The Department of Justice actually is doing an investigation right now, which I know we're bulletproof because I was leading the discussions for Ford, that they're trying to claim antitrust violation, right? That we were in cahoots with and it wasn't. I mean, we're talking about, the automakers always get together to talk about regulations. We actually had, whatever company, do we have any lawyers in the room here, CB? Do we? Any lawyers? Steve? Okay. So this is very rare, right? So in the meetings that we were in, we had 10 lawyers to every person that we had negotiated. But I only mention that because we were absolutely making sure that didn't happen. So we're not worried about that. But there's actually a lawsuit from the DOJ against those four automakers for colluding. but we think that we're good to go. But I don't know if we're going to. We probably won't. I don't think we'll need to. Okay.
Hey, no. Oh.
Nope. Wayne can't answer questions. See, he's mad because I told him that he was very wealthy. People are want to get his business
So
card.
I have a comment, which is maybe a little lengthy, and then a question.
Okay, it has to be a nice
comment is directed at CB, actually.
Oh.
Did you guys videotape this?
Did we videotape this? Yes, we did.
You did? Okay. Thank God, because that's worth its weight in gold, what you just heard from John Viera.
Which
I mean,
part? John's part or your part?
John's. John, this was like a goal from a face-off, nothing but net from the half court,
Stop it.
grand slam,
I
you
was
know,
told the videotape
touchdown from a kickoff. You ought to show this.
We're still selling vehicles from Ford, right? I'll give them the paperwork.
I got a
3 or 4 more
BMW.
vehicles.
You got to show this to your incoming students and say, write down 3 things you learned after watching this guy. Michigan
you.
is really lucky to have you as an executive in residence. That's
Thank you.
that's as impactful as I've heard. So congrats.
Thank you.
Brief question.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot about experiences dealing with environmental and sustainability issues. A lot of it was U.S.-centric. Ford,
Right.
of course, operates elsewhere.
Yep.
Any things you can share with the audience about observations, whether it's attitudes, practices, differences in places
Yeah.
outside the U.S.?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, one of the things that I mentioned, so as we're dealing with fuel economy regulations throughout the world. So I mentioned that, this wasn't a surprise. I thought it might be that the Trump administration was a little different than the Obama administration in this space. Beijing is a little bit different than everybody else as well, right? So dealing with regulations in China was really unique. I will say, and I want to make it relevant to an academic institution. So our ability from a non-Chinese automaker standpoint to have any kind of voice with credibility in Beijing was basically non-existent. What we did was we actually partnered with Tsinghua University in Beijing, who was well respected by the government, and we actually leveraged them to have conversations on fuel economy and some of our views that actually worked out pretty effectively. So my point is, we talk about stakeholders, how you engage stakeholders. That's an example of a stakeholder we engaged with not in the US that we wouldn't necessarily have taken the same approach in the US. So I think that's one element. I think having a global vehicle really helped us from a CO2 strategy standpoint, because when we looked at the remember I said the fuel economy standards in the US were less stringent than they were in the target that we had, right? And that our finance people are coming after us. The good news is when you looked at the European CO2 reduction requirements, it was line on line with our glide path. So the good news was I was able to leverage Europe to say, hey guys, the bottom line is, another point to the strategy folks, we sell global vehicles. Are we going to have unique vehicles that we're going to make in the US versus Europe? Because if we go down to the Bush administration level, we're going to have now different products in Europe than the US. So that was actually helpful in terms of moving forward. I would say from a recycling standpoint, the recycling story in Karen, I don't know if you encountered this, in South America and Brazil was a little different. So we actually use Reprieve in the fabrics of our Fusion, which is our mid-size vehicle. It's a global vehicle. And we couldn't talk about the use of recycled content in Brazil as overtly as we could in the US, because the Brazilian consumer looked at it as that was like garbage, and because how they don't have recycling there, so they couldn't get their heads around recycling. So they're thinking, well, wait a minute, right? I'm looking at all this trash. So what is it? You just grabbing that trash and spinning it into yarn and putting it in, and you want me to pay a premium for that? So we had to be careful when we talked about environmental actions in the US versus other parts of the world, because there could be some nuances that we weren't able to use the same messaging. Does that help?
That's a perfect example.
Okay.
Very good. Grant.
Grant, is he from Pittsburgh, right?
He is.
Right? So he's the next mayor of Pittsburgh, so we need to give him time. Okay.
You better believe it.
Okay.
Watch what you wish for. So I get one request, 2 questions. I'm going to start with the questions.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about Ford's decision to be move from the Ford Motor Company to a mobility company?
Yes.
Number 1. Number 2, can you talk about the possibilities of integrating vehicle charging and the network of vehicle charging to help alleviate range anxiety?
Right.
And why Ford and other motor companies haven't done what Tesla has done in terms of deploying charging equipment? And the third point I want to make is
I think you said there's 2 questions.
It's 2 questions, but I got a request now.
A and a B part.
We need electrified police vehicles.
Yep.
Right now, Ford is the only that provides hybrid vehicles.
Right.
There's an extensive U.S. market. I got about 200 sustainability directors around North America
Yep.
who would buy them. Can the industry provide them?
When you say electric, what kind? So not hybrids, full
Beyond-
battery electric?
We need to go beyond hybrids.
Okay.
So
Okay.
for layman's in the room, like the basic challenge is a police cruiser is the #1 vehicle in our fleet in terms of vehicle miles traveled. It's a mobile office and has a lot of high technical demand, so computers and other electrical equipment. So the drivetrain and traditional electrical vehicles don't suffice. So.
Right. Okay. So great. So I'm going to start with the last question, and you're going to remind me of the first question and the second part of the first part of the second question. Okay. All right. So with regard to police vehicles, so right now we do offer a hybrid police interceptor, and you probably know that Ford supplies 60% of all police vehicles.
We have 32 of them ordered already. So
What's that?
We have 32 of them, 16 ordered right now.
That's great.
Trying to push to 32.
That's great. So you guys are doing your part. I know Chicago just ordered, what was it, 400 or something, some ungodly number, right? And part of it is because we build them in Chicago. So right now we're at the hybrid level, right? And a lot of it is actually from an affordability standpoint. So I understand, the next iteration is going to be a plug-in hybrid version, right? Where you could plug the vehicle in, it'll go 20, 30 miles, right? And then it will act as a hybrid. And then the next iteration after that is a full battery electric. The issue that we have, police organization, Pittsburgh might have a lot more money than most jurisdictions, but the pure battery electrics are about 20 grand. Ballpark, you're going to pay about $20,000 more. So it's not quite there yet. Clearly, the company's working on it, and all companies are working on it, so it's not just a secret with Ford. So that's not quite there yet. So we're just at the hybrid phase right now. We'll probably go to the plug-in hybrid phase next, and then a full battery electric after that. I would state that, contact the Ford, your interface of marketing folks to try to find out a timetable. They're not going to give you an exact timetable. If you're not comfortable with the hybrid, maybe, you want to wait for the plug-in hybrid, and you could ask when that might appear. But as you know, police vehicles use a lot of auxiliary power. And even with the hybrids, right, they could run all the auxiliary power off the battery, so that you don't have to idle the vehicle to run that power. But we're not quite to the full battery electric yet. Okay, so that was the second part of the
So the second piece is the idea around charging networks.
Charging networks, yes. So you probably didn't know this, but Ford announced that we partnered with maybe not a company that everybody is thrilled with. My wife is very thrilled with them. Amazon. So the Amazon, we get a lot of packages, right? Amazon Home Services. And so we are installing 12,000 charging stations, 3 plugs each, and customers who buy our EVs are going to have 2 years of free use of that. I think Tesla now is not offering free charging on their vehicles. They've kind of backed off. But we're kind of following that model, and I don't disagree with Andy. I think Tesla is an innovator, right? And my view is that's great because it helps out the industry, and if we could copy them, that's great. But we're actually going down that path, and I think in Europe you're going to see a lot of the European companies, because they're really moving toward electrification very quickly. They're also going to start bringing on charging stations to get rid of that range anxiety. We can't just wait for somebody else to do it, we the automaker. So great question. And the first question was?
About being a mobility.
Mobility, yes. So, Andy talked about, I think Andy actually mentioned this, right? So we have always been, Ford has always been a provider of, we said affordable transportation for the masses, right? We're not Tesla, right? We're affordable vehicles. Henry Ford, Model Ts for everybody. We really move toward, and I think all the automakers are doing this, they're saying mobility is what the name of the game is. Let's not think about just making the steel box on wheels. We should be in the business of moving people, right? And moving people, when you think about mobility, that's mobility for on the social aspect, mobility for the underserved, it's mobility for the disabled, it's mobility for the aged population. So I'm talking about those individuals that can't have personal ownership. If you're a mobility company, you could address all those. And Andy, I might have even read in your article, how are we, if we're a mobility company that's not just focused on selling the box, how are we getting better utilization of that vehicle versus having it sit 95% of the time with nobody in it. And just a quick from our finance folks in here. So automakers strive for 6-7% return is great, right? If you're a premium, maybe you get 10%. If you focus on the service of moving people versus just producing that box, 20 to 25%. So you want to talk about a business opportunity as well as a transformative thinking, it only makes sense to go toward mobility. We haven't figured out what are all the elements to do that, but we're moving in that, Ford's moving in that direction, and I think you're going to see all the automakers do that. Does that help?
That's very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, very good. It's time for the drinks. Okay. Thanks. Hope that was okay.